Call the meeting to order. Good evening, everybody. This is a public hearing into the bylaw. One bylaw that will be introduced to you in a moment by Deputy City Clerk. Council for City of Coquitlam has given first reading to this bylaw and directed that a public hearing be held to get the public's perspective on it. So the way it'll work is this. Staff from the city's Planning and Development Department will present a summary of the bylaw, and then we'll open the floor to anyone who wants to present views or share views with council on the bylaw. There's three people who have pre-registered. They'll be giving the first opportunity to speak, and then after that we'll open the floor to anyone else who wishes to speak. Council members are here with an open mind and are here to listen to your input. No one has prejudged the outcome of this application, but I assure you this isn't a question and answer period. It's not an opportunity to debate the merits of the proposed bylaw with either council members, with staff, or with those in the audience who might disagree with your view or with whom you might disagree yourself. So we're going to ask that everyone restrict their comments to the proposed bylaw, be as brief and concise as possible, be respectful in your submission, and not make personal comments about anyone else in the room or anyone else, period. We'll ask that the audience be respectful of each speaker and allow him or her to make their point without interruption, without clapping, without booing, without during any of the presentations made this evening. As chair of the hearing, I've been asked by council to conclude any presentation that does not relate to the bylaw, that becomes abusive, or that becomes repetitive of views that the speaker has already made known to council members. If you wish to provide a written submission, you must hand that submission in prior to the adjournment of the item tonight. After that item has been adjourned, after this public hearing has been adjourned, council will not hear anything else, cannot hear anything else about this proposed bylaw. Now, immediately following the adjournment tonight, if council can, and if there haven't been questions left unanswered that staff are going to be doing some research on, we'll open a regularly scheduled council meeting that has been scheduled after every public hearing, where we might consider the item that's on tonight's public hearing. We don't have to, but council may consider it. Now I'm going to ask Ms. Lohr to introduce the bylaw, and the Planning and Development staff will make a presentation on this item.
Thank you, Your Worship. Item 1 is reference number 090095660RZ. It relates to zoning amendment bylaw number 4106-2010 for text amendment to the RM2, RM3 apartment zones, RT2 townhouse zone, and definitions. And I believe someone from Planning and Development will provide an overview.
Good evening, Your Worship and council members. The purpose of staff Hello? I think we have a dead mic.
Now, the mic's
Is it working? Okay,
the working.
Then I'll
just don't move it. There we go.
Continue forth. The purpose of the staff-initiated zoning bylaw text amendment is to address a number of limitations regarding the city's RM2 and RM3 medium-density apartment zones and the RT2 townhouse zone. Specifically, the proposed amendments would, 1, simplify the definitions for finished ground elevation, lot area, and lot coverage to improve understanding by applicants. 2, increase the lot coverage for the RT2, RM2, and RM3 zones to encourage wider walk-up low-rise apartment buildings. 3, increase the height in the RT2 to 3 stories from the existing 2 stories on flat sites and 2.5 stories on sloping sites. 4, reduce the front yard setbacks for the RT2, RM2, and RM3 zones to bring buildings closer to the street and provide better street definition. 5, increase the density of the RM2 zone from 0.9 times the lot area to 1.4 times the lot area, and for the RM3 zone from 1.2 times the lot area to 1.85 times the lot area. And 6, require off-street parking to be concealed for the RM2 and RM3 zones. The recommended amendment should improve application process and review by providing greater clarity to the zoning bylaw, as well as improve the flexibility and usability of the zones by allowing for a broader range of design solutions for sites utilizing the RT2, RM2, and RM3 zones. Staff are recommending that council give second, third, and fourth reading to bylaw number 4106, 2010. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I have 3 speakers registered. We'll begin with Sandra Marston.
Good evening, Mayor and Councilmen and women. I have a couple of submissions here. Who do I give them to?
Just Ms. Lohr.
I'd like to start with definition of a row house. I Googled. Single-family dwelling units attached to one another by common walls, generally with a common facade. Identical, uniform houses, which are usually found in cities with high density, not in bedroom communities, generally smaller and less luxurious than a townhouse, similar to tenement buildings. Most of them look like low-income government housing. Definition of a townhouse: non-uniform units, a fashionable row house, an upscale row house, a house in town constructed with different features than surrounding joined units, designed to be unique. Townhouse is an overall term, and row house is a subset. I'm very concerned regarding the proposed RT2 townhouse zone amendment in regards to the increased height from 2 stories to 3 stories, and what appears to be a lack of design guidelines in respect to townhouse development on Burke Mountain. The amendment to the current bylaw would affect all of Coquitlam, but I believe in particular could have a negative impact on the expansive ongoing development of Burke Mountain. I sat on city planning committees for both Upper Hyde Creek and Smiling Creek for about 6 years. The OCPs are a vision, but a fairly detailed vision for development. Yes, there would be some changes to be expected. However, it appears that this height increase will permit the possibility of development of unfettered row houses throughout Burke Mountain in areas zoned for RT2 townhouse development, similar to Tatton development behind Victoria Drive Park. I've yet to talk to anyone who sees these row houses and likes them, or even describes them as something other than boring, horrible-looking identical boxes with windows. I understand that as the RT2 bylaw currently is written, developments must have variance approval before building 3-story row houses. It appears that by passing the proposed amendments to the current bylaw, developers would not have to get variance approval to put up 3-story row houses. I believe that in the development process there should be at least design guidelines and approval of townhouse design to accompany any proposed changes to the RT2 townhouse bylaw, in particular for Burke Mountain. The design guidelines and approval process would at least enable these townhouse types to have a better fit and look with the surrounding homes and environment. If there are no design guidelines for Burke Mountain RT2 townhouses, then the vision of the OCP, which committee spent so many hours inputting, discussing, and debating under the current bylaw, could be lost. I personally would like to see the proposed RT2 townhouse amendments defeated and continue to have the developers apply for variances for 3-story row houses, which appears to be as synonymous with townhouse. In that way, the Planning Department, Council, and citizens can be aware of the type of development on Burke Mountain. I believe that if the RT2 amendments pass without design guidelines, there could be a flurry of identical row housing development. Currently, if there is a point at which design guidelines kick in, how will the amendment changes affect or hinder that process, and how will the amendment changes ensure a varied look to any RT2 townhouse or any other zone townhouse development? As I recall, conventional townhouses were to be built in the city centre of Burke Mountain and in areas where a large density or cluster of population was to be encouraged around a more commercial type of area. Also, just because the amendments are the norm throughout most of the Lower Mainland should not necessarily guide us in the development of Burke Mountain. Concern has been expressed by one of my neighbours about the proposal to change setbacks at the rear of the property lines backing onto the green space from 25 feet to 10 feet. Excuse me. It was expressed that digging a foundation that close to the property line could damage the shrubbery and trees set aside in environmentally sensitive areas or even within covenant areas. Then at some point the trees within these areas would have to be removed for safety. So if the goal of the amendment is to reduce the setbacks, that should be looked at carefully, particularly in the development of Burke Mountain. Specifically, there is a 10 to 15 unit townhouse development which is being proposed as conventional townhouse, a proposal change from single family homes along the creek between Queenston and Highland Drive outside the sensitive riparian zone of shrubs and trees and outside a proposed covenant area. I believe that could be open to three-story townhouse row house development if this bylaw amendment is passed. Single-family or the other street-oriented townhouse zoning would be, in my opinion, possibly a better fit. Regardless, there needs to be design guidelines for all townhouse-type zonings in order to preserve the integrity of the OCP visions, particularly for the Burke Mountain area. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, our second speaker is Janet Klopp.
Hi, I'm Janet Klopp, and I'm the aforementioned neighbor of Sandra Marsden. Yes, I am concerned about row houses being built directly behind my house because I don't think that it's the best place for it in Coquitlam. We've been in that neighborhood a long time, and as the adjacent property owner, I think it's important that I be consulted about what's going right next to my home. The RT2 townhouses are not something that I would like to see at that property. My husband and I actually, we have a renovations company, so it's possible that we would want to develop our own property in the future. Townhouses were not what we were thinking we would want to be doing there. And so I would not want to see a blanket proposal, I guess, across Coquitlam. I would like to see people have to look at the properties involved and address variances. Toward that end also, I am concerned also about this, about the setbacks changing from basically 25 feet to 10 feet, especially adjacent to city-owned or park properties. I've seen that in a couple of instances up on Burke Mountain, and the next thing we knew was those trees the mature trees adjacent to those properties had to be cut down because they were suddenly a danger. And so if you're building homes that close to properties that have mature trees on them, I'm not saying it couldn't happen in all instances, but I think it's something that needs to be considered very carefully. So I'm basically in agreement with Sandra Marsden in her feelings, and those we've spoken quite at length about the RT2 townhouse zoning, and we would like to see it very carefully considered before it would be passed as a sort of a unilateral course of action throughout our city, and especially on Burke Mountain. We can't help but feeling a little bit under siege up there because we feel like we're being sort of treated like a blank canvas up there, and we're not. There's some of us who are residents up there, and we don't intend to be leaving anytime soon. So we would like us to be considered, and certainly a lot of people worked hard on the OCP committees. I think that their guidance and their visions and their proposals were worthwhile, and I think that we need to consider carefully before we just sort of stroke off that time and energy those people put into that, and say, oh yes, we'll make this amendment for you, without there being some real reasons to do so. Thank you.
Thank you. Hugh Kerr.
Your Worship and members of Council, my name is Hugh Carr. I'm with Polygon Homes, Vice President Development. And I've come to speak in support of the amendments, in particular the RT2 amendment and the allowance for three-story townhomes. We build a number of three-story townhomes in municipalities across the Lower Mainland, and it's a housing form that we feel affords increase in density, and hence increase in affordability by being able to build narrower structures. I feel that the proposed setback variations would be an improvement in terms of improved street presence for buildings on the street, and so we're in support of these proposed amendments. Thank you.
Councillor Asmussen.
Just some questions through to staff, please. It was raised about the setback, the rear lot line. That's fairly a short lot line now. Is that the building right up to that line, or is the is there landscaping areas? Because it does seem fairly limiting in green space in the back of the property. So the lot line, the rear lot line. So can you give me some more clarity? Because I'm sort of leaning to staying with the 25 feet. Can you give me the rationalization why that would need to be reduced, and what's the rationalization behind that?
Through your worship, the rationale for reducing the setbacks, not just the rear yard setback, was to provide a greater opportunity for design solutions in terms of opening up the buildable envelope within a particular site. The thought is that by reducing the rear yard, it would allow for hopefully some better solutions in terms of the location of the parking, particularly for the RT2, hopefully better utilizing lane access as opposed to front, and just generally speaking, giving some greater flexibility to the overall design of the site by bringing the buildings either closer or to either the front or the rear to the side.
But you are losing green space in that type of design, or are you staying with the same amount of greens?
In terms of the common amenity area requirements, that's still a standard requirement in the RT2 zone, that the designer needs to provide a standard amount of common amenity area space, and typically for the RT2, that is provided outside, because there's not, as in with typically a high-rise, they can be provided indoors through either pool space or exercise room, but in the RT2 they typically tend to be outdoor amenity spaces, so that I think is addressed through that.
So you're shifting the space into another area of the development then?
Through the common amenity area requirements, it's still, yeah, exactly, that will be, it provides essentially providing for that space and maybe on the interior portions of the site as opposed to putting it into the rear portions of the site.
Okay, so you're not losing, you're just readjusting it. The other issue is, I guess the concern I have, and I have it right behind me, is the 3-story townhouses that have just been built. And I do notice the massing of it, and I looked at, you're proposing a 7.6 meter, but I'd like to see that maybe if you could look at bringing that up like to a 10 meter setback, bring it back a bit further. I think trying to reduce a little further out some of that massing because you got the phrase in here, against a single family OCP. So that would be the one thing I'd like to see adjusted on this. That's feasible? Yep. Okay, thank you.
Okay. No other speakers? Are there any other speakers to this item? Second time, are there any other speakers to this item? For the third and final time, I didn't say this before, I'll only ask 3 times. This is the third and final time. Are there any other speakers to the final item? Seeing none, I declare this item and the public hearing adjourned.